Morning, everybody. I guess we have to have another meeting. Okay, yeah, the first item is the First Nations land acknowledgement. The TNRD acknowledges that we connect with the First Nations communities across the vast region of the district. And today we are located on the Tecumseh-Secwepemc territory, situated within the unceded ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumseh, the Secwepemc, and respect the territory and the land on which we are gathered today. Okay, next on the agenda, are there any additions or deletions? Okay, we'll we need a motion to receive the minutes from the last EA directors. Okay. All in favor? Motion supported. So we're going to go right into the closed meeting. In accordance with Community Charter Section 9(2)B, negotiations with another level of government. So we need a motion to go into closed meeting. Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor? Good, thank you. Just before we get into the closed meeting, we have Dallas Brandt here today. She's Herb's alternate. Dallas and I have known each other for probably 20 years, probably longer than that. She used to work at the city years ago. She was our parks and recreation person. And Dallas also was the original designer for our changes at the park in Lower Nicola when we first started. So I think she's been to a few meetings, but welcome, Dallas. Okay, now do we have one group which are we out of in camera now? This is now public, back into the public meeting that we're recording.
It's public right now, yeah, being recorded.
So we're still in a closed session?
No, we're in a
Okay.
public session. It's being recorded. All right. Good morning, EA directors, Chair Laird. I hope everyone is doing well today. My name is Joe Kang. I'm one of two community services coordinators here at the Thompson-Nicola Regional District. My partner, Sherry Madden, is joining us via Zoom, I believe. She's listening in on from Clearwater. So hey, Sherry. So today's purpose of today's presentation is going to be a super quick rundown, and we'll have a period at the end to ask some questions. But I just wanted to talk about street lighting and how it looks from the TNRD side and our operations division, and what we're kind of working with. I bring this forward because, you know, the last few months, there's been several EA directors reaching out about street lighting and, you know, what the process looks like. So we thought it'd be a good idea just to do a quick FYI, this is what we do, and any questions and how we can go forward with these. So just in a little overview, we'll discuss the two types of street lighting services, the process of getting new street lights, costs for new street lights, and the continued operations, and some common concerns and issues and complaints that we hear and get from the public. So when it comes to the two types of street lighting, the first one we have is a specified area. So these are actually established TNOD bylaws. Currently, we have 6 street lighting specified area bylaws, and that's one's in Avola, Blackpool, Coldwater Road, Pritchard, Bavenby, and Whitecroft. And just like any specified area, only the landowners in that specified area are taxed. So there are maps drawn or boundaries of who's getting taxed for that. Next, we have our critical streetlights. Again, we have a bylaw for this, and then actually a policy formed on how we go forward with proceeding with our critical street lighting. One thing to take note is that all electoral areas do participate except for area B and E. So it's 8 electoral areas, and just some history from I was talking to Sherry Madden and trying to understand why the 2 areas aren't in the critical street lighting bylaw, and this is actually like back in, I think, 90s or early 2000s, and the directors at the time chose not to be included into the the bylaws.
Area B actually does participate because Avola is in Area B. Blue River does not participate because they're improvement districts.
So basically, so Avola is a specified area. So the critical street lighting is actually a separate bylaw. So there is an established bylaw for Avola for street lighting, and whereas critical's a separate bylaw on its own. And then with critical street lights, there are singular street lights at critical intersections for safety reasons, where there's transit stops, schools, cluster mailboxes, community and regional parks, and recreational parking areas. Just this is the policy that we have currently when it comes to critical street lighting. And just one quick example of a critical location and what it looks like. This was in Area M, and this we did last year with Director Laird. There was an ask from a community member off Monk Park Road there to obtain some street lighting under the mailboxes. Again, this was for a safety concern, and we went out there and did our assessment and read our policy, and everything fit right, and we were able to get a street light installed under that mailbox there. And so this is what a typical critical location may look like.
We were just wondering what that single street light would have cost. Any
Yeah,
idea?
so I'm just gonna get forward here with the costs and stuff, so. So quickly, how do I get these street lights? Again, with the established area, like the 6 locations that we have, it would go through the process of establishing an actual service area, and that would require feedback and approval from the impacted properties. And on top of that, we are actually in the middle of drafting a new policy pertaining to our bylaw when it comes to specified areas about how we can include more lights in the existing services. So just an example, we have a bylaw, street lighting policy or bylaw out in Whitecroft there, and there was a request from the community last year to include more lights because I guess more residents had moved in and people were walking their dogs and all that stuff late at night in the winter. And currently we went out and actually got some papers signed by community members saying they're okay with it, and we're in the midst of installing lights under that bylaw, but we are trying to create an in-house policy that may help us guide us through the future how we're going to proceed with adding new lights on existing bylaws. With critical streetlights, the request usually comes in from the public, or the EA directors usually have their constituents reach out to them, as some of you guys have had, and then we have a look. I will actually personally go out and have a little quick drive and see what we're working with and how we can implement it, and if it does fit our policy. And if it does fit our policy, we're able to contact BC Hydro, and they actually assign a project manager, and we work together closely to get this completed and done as fast as possible. Going to the costs of new lights and operating them, the installation of new street lights is roughly $550 per light. And I say this $550 only if this is everything's the perfect, there's a pole and everything's ready to go. So that's $550 and we can get it done. But that's not always the case, as we're seeing some of these critical section lights are requiring bigger poles, better poles, or there's not enough space, and costs unfortunately are in, like, I think I was talking to Director Thorpe, a pole can cost up to $20,000. So we're hoping every light's just $550, but please keep in mind it's not always the case. BC Hydro has to assess it and see if they're even allowed to put a light there. And an ongoing operating cost, roughly it's about $30 a month. Well, and I talked to the BC Hydro a couple of days ago, and they're just expect like a 2% increase yearly. It's just to take note. So this is just a example of a area established. So Director Smith had reached out about a project out in South Green Lake for some street lighting. So just kind of a rough estimate. South Green Lake is, we were looking to add some lights on Green Lake Road there, and we were looking to add about 7 lights. And right now, the first major cost of just installing the lights is the highest spike in taxation. So that will be the first year. And then moving forward, it goes down just as operating costs. So as you can see, the 2025, if we were to project or go with the project, it would be a significant increase in taxation for the electoral area. But then back into 2026, it would drop right down significantly to just the operating costs. And these are just another example of what the map actually looks like from BC Hydro. We have a database that we have access to on our side that we're able to look into BC Hydro and see which poles are available where, and how it's possible to have lights there. Keep in mind, a lot of these poles are older again. So BC Hydro, although it's their, I don't like to say it's their poles, and we were hoping they replace them, but they want to keep, I get it, costs down, and they don't want to do anything unless they have to. And then, but if we want to add lights, they're like, you guys can go ahead and just pay for the new pole then. So that's what we're seeing with a lot of these new critical street lights. So quickly, some common concerns, issues, and complaints from the public. So as many directors I've reached out to over especially the last year, changes to the highway lighting requirements from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. So I've rang up a few of you asking you if we want to keep some street lights at critical intersections on highways. And I mean, 100% of the time it is yes. But the Ministry of Transportation the last 2 years actually went around the whole province, and how they explained it to me, they have their formula and their procedures on how and where lights should be. And a lot of these lights that we see in our rural communities on important busy intersections, they deem basically not needed. So they will come back to us and be like, hey, like if the TNRD wants to take over the operation of the light, go ahead. But if not, we're going to go forward with just removing the light, because there's, from our side, we don't see a need. And it's been a very controversial thing with a lot of communities, and have had many discussions with directors on like how exactly this equation works and where they get their reasoning behind it. But that's what we're told. And thankfully, like most directors are okay with moving forward with keeping the lights, because it is a safety concern for the community in their eyes. And just going on to the second point, the lack of streetlights at highway intersections with rural roads. We'll get many calls from community members about how there's some major intersections that merge onto the highway that there's zero like streetlights. And again, that's a safety concern, especially in the winter. And had a call 2 days ago about some street lighting as well, and why there's no lights in that particular intersection. And then the complexity of installation, again, the pole conditions, having no poles, resident and property owners. So one thing that we do keep in mind is when we do add new lights, a lot of these people that are living in the rural areas, there's a reason they're living in the rural areas. So when we come and add a street light right in front of their house, it can get them a little, mad. And we try to work as much as we can with the local property owners nearby when we're adding a new light, just to get their sense of, are they okay with the brightness of a light? Are they okay with this light being installed in front of their driveway? And then going into the second point, the brightness of the lights, BC Hydro I think it was 2 years ago, they changed all the brightnesses of their lights in the province, and it was a big thing here in the municipality of Kamloops, with a lot of the lights being too bright for property owners, and we're seeing the same in the rural areas. People complaining they're too cool, or they're too bright, and people are able to see into their properties and all that stuff. So that's something we always got to keep in mind. Yeah, so that's a little quick rundown. If anybody has any questions or concerns, try to answer them.
I did improvement districts. I know Laura Nicholas has an improvement districts, and they're in charge of the lighting within the improvement district, and they are taxed. The residents within that district are taxed for the lighting. So there's that other aspect that I wasn't aware that happened in the improvement districts. I was sure that it was all TNRD, but it's not. Director Hooton?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just two things, Joe. I've had a couple of people ask me to turn off at the Knutsford Community Hall, which goes up to Long Lake Road. Granted, it's within the city of Kamloops boundaries, but 100 yards up, we're into TNRD, and it's a major intersection for people living up in that Long Lake corridor. Would there be an opportunity to look at putting a light in? And if that was the case, would we work with the city and Hydro on that? First question. The other one is coming off of Highway 97 onto Duck Range Road, just up from the Monty Creek brake check on your left there, where you take off to Duck Range, is a very, it's on a ridge, it's on a sharp corner, and in the fog, it's horrible to see. And I've had some folks live up that road question me, is there something we can do with that turnoff to make it better lit? So I don't know if a street light would be in order, but it's a very dangerous, especially somebody that's coming from the city of Kamloops side heading towards Westwold. You want to turn left there. It's can be kind of touchy, and maybe if we could have a look at that together, Joe.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Again, with any intersection and looking at critical street lighting, they're all by case, and definitely we have contacts at the city of Kamloops, and we can have those discussions. So, yeah, just reach out to me, and we can see if it meets our critical street lighting policy and how we can explore different options to, make that intersection safe.
Any other questions? Director Gagne.
Thank you, Chair. Joe, just wondering, are we done with the downloading from Modi? Because it seems like every year they come up and say, oh, we don't need this one, we don't need this one. And I'm just wondering about that sort of policy.
Yeah, good question. Will we ever be done with downloading? I hope so, but to be completely honest, that's things change at their department too, and when different directors and managers come in and they have different views on what and how safety looks like. So I can't directly comment on how Modi sees street lighting, but from our perspective, I know the board and can advocate as a whole to the provincial government and ask and request that this not be done. But
In that regard, I'm just wondering, because I'd like to ask if we could get Modi back this spring. We had them in here last year, and I think it would be useful to have Modi come in, and I'd like to get that kind of on the agenda. But what I'd like to know is, do they have some criteria, or is it just a sort of a discretionary, it's a really dark night and I want one, or it's bright enough, we don't need one? Like, is there a standard that they have to follow?
yeah, so again, I was talking about last year. So there are actual criterias and work that goes into determining where lights are deemed safe and not safe. Like, it's not just random Joe driving it down and thinking, oh, light's not good or that light's not needed. So from the conversation I've had with the local area manager here, it's actually a pretty big process. Like, they have a bunch of stuff that go into it, and he was explaining some math equations and engineering equations and this and that, and I kind of stopped listening because I wasn't really understanding. But no, it's not just a lot of goes into taking a light out, and again, safety is their number one priority too, and they wouldn't just be dropping lights here and there. So
Chair, just a comment on the Modi invite. I know that's something that I've talked to a few directors about. We will certainly make a note to follow up with them and see if they're available, but the next EA meeting would be in March, I think the first week of March. That we can see if they're available.
Thank you. That would be great. Any other questions of Joe before we turn him loose again? Maybe go and talk to highways some more, maybe.
Perfect. Thank you,
Thanks
guys.
very much, Joe. Next on our agenda is an update on their emergency response plan. Is that Mr. Knuth, Mike? Is that your job?
Yeah, Mike Knox,
Okay.
our emergency program coordinator, and he will be giving an update. I touched on this very briefly in the training session yesterday and promised a further update here today. So I'll turn it over to Mike.
That one. All right, awesome.
You're
Thanks very
live.
much. Where's the clicker gone? There it is. Thank you. So good morning. Thanks very much. Mike Knopf, has asked us to give a brief update on some of the activities that are going on in the emergency management world. Some of this you've already been introduced to today, so, oh. There we go. So just what I just want to talk briefly, a little bit about snowpack. Disclaimer, I did this slide deck earlier this week, so, some of it has likely changed in the last few days. I want to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we've, and stuff we've done with the UBCM Community Emergency Preparedness Fund grants that we've got. Talk a bit about our evacuation planning, the EOC grant, the ESS grant. We've got an agricultural emergency management session planned here in the TNRD. Going to touch base on that, a little bit about the new act, and just some questions and answers if you've got any concerns. So jumping right in, I think you saw this slide. This is the snow or the water supply bulletin from the province. So the first one came out for this year, January 8th. Generally, they're released every monthly on about the 8th of the month. So we'll get our next one February 8th and we'll see what changes occurred. Pretty significant numbers on the board here from a perspective of, well, it's low. We went into the winter season in drought, and for the first bit of winter here, we didn't see a lot of precipitation. So, provincially, 56% of normal. So that's a pretty low number. So that's raising our concerns for drought going into the summer and wildfire. Realistically, well, as you can see out the window, things are going to change. So we typically accumulate snow until the end of April. So there's still lots of time to get snow up in the hills. So things will change. If I look into, the crystal ball, I'm thinking we're going to be very close to where we were last year. And, last year we had low water numbers, but we still did see freshet flooding in a few places. And then, of course, the significant fire season. So even with the low snowpack numbers, we can still anticipate some freshet issues. So next bulletin is on the 8th, and at the very bottom of the screen, I've put in the URL for where you can go to get the water supply bulletin. It's in the public domain and it's online. So there's the link if you want to take a look at your the numbers come the next report in February. just got this graph, the other day from, the ministry. So this is the overall graph of water supply in the province. You can see the black line at the bottom. It's actually below the minimum levels. It's below the 0 percentile. So that's shockingly low from a provincial perspective. There is a disclaimer in the bulletin that they were expecting that this latest snow dump will bring us out of that minimum level. So February 8th numbers will change. So it looks bad now, but you know, we could get an awful lot of snow between now and the end of April. So that's pretty much what I had to say for, you know, the crystal balling. We're already thinking, preparing and getting ready for freshet and fire season. So we'll see what that looks like for us. So a little bit about the grant update. The grants we've received, we love to spend the province's money. You know, thanks very much to Kim, who helps us with the grant applications and a lot of the paperwork. There's a lot of work that goes into, you know, accessing the grants and, you know, trying to get that money spent in a reasonable taxpayer efficient manner, but we're doing our very best to access as much money from the province as we can. So one of the funding packages we got was for evacuation plans. If you go online to our website, all of the evacuation plans, including the member municipalities, are there. But excluding the member municipality, there's 17 plans to cover off the EA. They're all really old and they're all very, very high level. So, you know, we're trying to improve those plans and, you know, so we've got 5 that we're looking at this year, listed them there, and they're based on the existing plans. The goal is that we want to use this opportunity to develop a good template and, you know, allow us that, you know, going into the future, either with grant applications or with in-house resources, we can, you know, build out the other plans. We're getting more granular in the plans, so they're a little more meaningful. And what we're doing there is we're trying to break down each one of the plans into multiple zones so that there's some sort of logic. And the goal is to try to define how long is it going to take to evacuate that area. So when we get a notice, when we're working with wildfire, if we need 36 hours to evacuate, that they've built that into their planning so that we know when we're talking with them, and they're not going to say, okay, get everybody out in an hour, because it's not possible. So they can put that into their planning with our numbers and say, okay, we need a day and a half notice to make that happen efficiently. So just a little bit about the plans we are looking at. So everybody likes pictures. So the different colors here, this is the North Clearwater plan. This, nope, doesn't zoom. So just an example of some of the zones. That's, you know, the North Clearwater Valley. We've got, you know, up the highway from Clearwater, East Blackpool, West Blackpool, tried to cover off the significant populations and, you know, looking at egress. So we'll get a little more granular on what those plans look like. You know, roughly called Big Bar area. This is almost the entire electoral area that we've covered off on this one. So, you know, really wanted to do this one because they've done a lot of really good work around Green Lake. And there's, you know, some evacuation planning that's already occurred that we haven't documented. So, you know, let's get that and, you know, make sure it exists in, you know, the corporate memory going on further. The Lytton area, you know, a frequent flyer. So, you know, it's certainly worth the effort and time to, you know, work on these plans because there are always fires in this part of the world. It is very fire prone. And, you know, the more granular we can get these plans, the better. Paul Lake, Deloro, Pinnetan, that's another target area, high populations, you know, some limited egress. So we'll get that done. And then, you know, the Savinaw, Wallace Sheen, Thompson Rivers Estates, that area there. Again, egress is an issue. And so these were our targets right off the bat. You don't see your EA area, your area of concern, we're going to get there. And, you know, we want to make sure that we're doing this in a really tight way so that we can bring these plans forward and, you know, capitalize on the work that the contractor we have engaged is doing now. So the other grants, we applied and were successful for a grant for the EOC. So we've now pretty much finished with the actual renovations of the EOC room down on the third floor. We spent a bunch of money on the information displays, you know, TVs, some video conferencing stuff, a bunch of IT stuff, the physical renovations. We've actually got a dividing wall up in the EOC. So, you know, functionally on a day-to-day, we can use that as 2 meeting rooms for the TNRD. And then, you know, if we need to, we can open up that wall and expand and make a bigger, better EOC. We have an ESS grant that we're trying to spend. We're really focusing on getting some, you know, PPE, high visibility jackets for the responders as they're out in the field at night. You know, some ESS mobile kits, and then some IT and stuff like that. I mentioned the Ministry of Agriculture training. So this was brought up by the Ministry of Agriculture to us. We did a debrief for our EOC activation here a little while ago, and the Ministry of Agriculture said, hey, we've got funding to do some training. And, you know, our goal is to have the rest of the province looking at the TNRD saying, how come they can support their agricultural community so well? That's our goal. We want to be leading this. So this is sponsored by the Minister of Agriculture. We'll be holding it here, trying to get, you know, RCMP. We've got some other local governments, the contractors who have supported us in the EOC, Ministry of Agriculture staff. The Minister of Agriculture is going to be inviting some other folks to that too.
You want questions now, Mike, or do you want to wait?
Yep.
Sorry, just a quick question. Is this something that the area directors could be part of?
I've got that question written down already, and I'm gonna be talking to the organizer, Sally, from the Ministry of Agriculture, and see if that makes sense.
Okay.
Then, you know, so the goal here, we're going to be talking about processes and procedures. You know, how access passes is going to be a big one. How do we get people in to manage their operations, whether they're, you know, just a veg only operation and we're talking about irrigation, or, you know, one of the cases in the Turtle Valley this year was harvesting. You know, they hit the perfect time to harvest, and, you know, it's now or not. So how do we get people into, you know, fundamentally save their businesses and make sure that they can, you know, maintain an income? That's a conversation with wildfire. Safety is always the #1 priority, but we're highly motivated to, you know, work with the communities to make sure that they get that support. Oh, EDMA, one of our least favorite topics. So we have the new act now. If you want, Bill 31 is the new Emergency Disaster Management Act. The legislation is in the can. So that is already passed. It's got royal assent. We're now waiting on the regulation development. There is an open forum for feedback for regulation development. It was delayed to or extended to the end of the month. So Kevin and I will be working on some document to provide some of our concerns and issues forward. And, you know, the board will get a copy of that submission when Kevin and I send it in. We've already started some of the work under the Emergency Disaster Management Act. There's Indigenous engagement requirements to consult, collaborate, coordinate with First Nations, and we're already starting that work. We're in a really good place. We've been working closely with the First Nations for a long time. Now we just need to formalize this. And
Mike, we have one question from Director Grenier.
sure,
Mike, didn't we write a letter asking to extend it?
and it was extended.
And it was extended to January 31st, so that's only 14 days.
Good letter.
Yeah.
Actually happened.
No, but I mean, 14 days from now, our response that you and Kevin are working on has got to be in, if I understand the timing.
Yes.
And are we going to be able to do that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
mean, we've very much got a notional framework of some of our concerns, and some of them have already been addressed. You know, the province has already committed. One of the big concerns is risk assessments. There's a requirement to do a risk assessment. We don't quite understand what that means in the rural the rural areas of British Columbia. How granular do we need to get those risk assessments? Are we talking about a property point? Are we talking about where there's 20 property points? What does it really look like? Because, you know, for the regional district, it becomes very difficult because of the vastness of, you know, the TNRD. But the legislation also requires the province to do a risk assessment. So if the province is required to do a risk assessment, well, fundamentally, you know, we're talking about the same piece of ground. So what does the province's risk assessment look like? Because, you know, clearly we're going to want to use that as the starting point for ours. And when is it going to be developed? So it's a real catch-22. We can't do some of that work until the province finishes their work because we don't want to duplicate efforts. So we'll see as the regulations are developed, what those requirements are and what that really looks like.
And we've just completed, if I've got it right, the fire smart studies for each of the areas.
Yes,
And
so,
so you're drawing on that as well, I take it?
yeah, I mean, that'll certainly be part of it. So the community wildfire CWRPs have been created. And they're being worked on through Jason Tomlin's department under the fire services. So we've got a bit of a separation there, but very clearly those plans are part of the overall emergency management plan. That's probably the most mature part of risk assessment we have in regards to emergency management. There's a lot of science about what that really means. When we're talking about all the other hazards, it's a little more gray. I mean, the geoscientists of BC still really haven't told us what landslide risk assessment looks like. You know, the professionals have differing opinions, different levels of tolerance. So that becomes a tough thing. So we're really dependent on the regulations that have yet to come. So wildfire, yeah. And we'll likely reference, you know, see the CWRPs in our plan. And that's pretty much everything I had this morning. Questions?
Director Sal? Director Helms.
Thank you, Chair. I had some conversation with municipal directors actually about the EOCs, about the TNRD EOC and their own municipal EOCs. Just kind of into the horizon, there is this concern from some municipalities that they perhaps see that more value in funding their own EOC rather than paying into the TNRD and you know, providing funding for ours, a joint one. If municipal members, you know, or how dependent is our TNRD EOC fund operation expenses? How dependent are we on municipal funding contributions? And if there is a risk, if you know, municipal members start seeing not a value to them and they start pulling out funding, like, is that a risk? Yeah, thank you.
I can answer that one through the chair, and actually I'll probably turn to Kevin as well. But first off, just to clarify the comment around the member municipalities and the EOC function. So each municipality runs their own EOC. However, we do have some municipalities where we have that contribute into our emergency program. So they do provide funding and we provide support to them, but we don't operate their EOC. They still operate their own EOC. Just wanted to put that out very clearly. Now, the member municipalities who do participate in our program contribute a fairly small component, but we have recognized we need some more clarity around what value they're getting for that service, and we're working on formalizing that in agreements. But I'll turn it over to Kevin to speak to this in a little more detail.
Yeah, through the director, Sal. I don't have the 2024 numbers in front of me here, but just to give you a rough idea, in 2023, the revenue coming in from the electoral areas was in the neighborhood of 200,000. And from the 7 municipalities that are part of the emergency program service, it was in the neighborhood of about 50,000. So certainly the vast majority of the money and the funding is coming from the electoral areas. And the 50,000 coming from the 7 municipalities is divided commensurate to their tax roll and tax assessment, things like that. Yeah, so in terms of the kind of services that we offer, as Mr. Vieira alluded to, yeah, the municipalities are still responsible for their own EOC and their own, decision making and response. The service we offer is more so a kind of emergency preparedness function. So around the planning, the training certainly is an area where there's, I think, a real economy of scale, where we can put on, joint regional training, things like that. And then a big component as well is we currently, administer and run their ESS teams, the emergency support services teams. So, for instance, in Clearwater, there's an ESS team there, but it is actually, and it's based out of the municipality, but it is a TNRD run team. Yeah.
I have a question. Mayor Getz said that they now have, or they will have their own EOC operating. And he mentioned area M&N is participating. Has anybody from Merrick contacted TNRD about some way of participating in an EOC there? I didn't know we were doing that until I heard from Mike. I don't think we've had any.
No, and I can speak to that. I heard that comment yesterday from Director Getz, and that was news to me as well. So I think I think the intent was for them to have that discussion with us about how that would work, because they have that new position created, and we definitely are open to working with them on that. I think there can be some benefit, but that's discussion that staff need to have.
Okay, I did have a question to Mike. So it was my thought to have like a fridge magnet that you could put into each home. What would you say are the key contacts which should go on that? Would it be the area director, and who else would be, if you're putting a phone, this number, like, would it be ESS emergency services phone number? Or so, because and then the egress, how I get back in, or is there something there that we already have in place with, you can put a phone number to?
Well, our EOC numbers really come live once we've activated the room. So I don't know as it would really be appropriate to put, the public line on, because we do actually have a public line. Certainly I would think, your emergency contacts, silly as it may sound, actually putting 911 on the sticker is a good thing. Likely the local contacts for the RCMP detachment, the day line, as opposed to the 911 line. I would certainly want to have something about Voyant Alert there. The TNRD's Facebook page and, social media feeds would be a really good thing to identify. Now, where are you going to go to get your appropriate information? That'd be a good thing to have on the sticker. Kevin, can you think of appropriate TNRD contact to put on a fridge sticker?
Well, I think we would probably, include contact information for a number of agencies on there, whether it was TNRD or not, because we often run into the situation where people don't necessarily know, whom to contact if they say want to report a wildfire, or have questions around BC wildfire activity, things like that. There is a 24/7 provincial emergency reporting number. That's likely what we would use on there, which would connect into the EMCR in Victoria, who then has the contact info for TNRD staff 24/7 as well, if they need to be reached. Yeah.
One of the reasons I was wanting to do that is there's a lot of properties in our area that don't have internet connection or a good service, or and they haven't educated themselves to actually use it and go online and find out the information. So that's why I thought if you just have, and like you say, you put it on the TNRD webpage, and each community usually has their own webpage. I know we have one in Lower Nicola, just send it around, and that'll make it a lot easier for people not to have the computer knowledge to get that kind of information.
I just want to add to that or kind of reiterate what Kevin said about the provincial emergency number. So that is typically how we would, at our EOC would get activated. So some sort of report gets into that emergency number and then they call us directly and we would activate if something's happening. So for example, someone witnesses a dam breach or a major flooding event. And again, we don't have an agency like BC Wildfire that responds to flooding, so it really just needs to be reported, and that was what would trigger then contacting whoever. So we have a duty phone in the TNRD that's on call 24/7. So anything that gets reported into that provincial line from the public, that then would call that duty phone and that would activate our EOC. So the idea of our TNRD duty phone is not a public number that could call us in the middle of the night saying, my chickens got out, I got an emergency. They call that provincial number, said they got their chickens out, and then they would decide whether or not that warrants a call to whoever's carrying that duty phone.
Thank you. Director Houghton.
Yes, Mike, actually Director Laird brought this up earlier this year because he had an incident just outside the city of Merritt where I'll use 5A for an example. It's heavily used truck traffic to get from Vancouver to Calgary and Edmonton. And who is actually responsible if you have say a truck fire halfway, I'll use Stump Lake for an example. You're halfway in between Kamloops and Merritt and two municipalities really don't have any jurisdiction. That truck catches on fire and might catch that side hill on fire up there. Who's actually responsible in the world of emergency to go out and look after that situation? Because everybody, according to David Laird, when he had his, everybody just dodged a bullet and let her burn.
Yeah, and the reality is, if there's so fire departments respond to motor vehicle accidents throughout the province under the road rescue program supported by EMCR. So that's specifically designed for entrapment, to rescue people out of broken bent cars. So if a fire department responds to a vehicle and it's on fire and it's confirmed that there's nobody in that vehicle, nobody's paying anybody to put it out. It will burn. There was a fully loaded logging truck on the road to Logan Lake. I think it burned for 3 days. Nobody put it out. Nobody's funded to put it out. MOTI, as the owner of the roadway, is in charge of that roadway. Now, if there's a threat that it's going to run into the bush and start a wildfire, wildfire has the ability to task a fire department to go put out that fire. This time of year, that's not going to happen. Wildfire will say, there is no threat of a wildfire. We're not going to pay you to go put that out. So it's a gap in the province that, vehicle fires on the highway often burn. And, there's no agency who's technically responsible for putting it out. Potentially. And if it becomes, a life safety issue, then certainly through the emergency program, we can start looking at that. And, there are exceptions to the rule. If it's a fully engulfed truck in the Great Bear Snow Shed on the Coquihalla, and there's a piece of infrastructure that's, going to be at risk, then, we use an accept when policy. And there are ways to, action that. But if it's in the middle of a numbered highway and it's, ultimately, the road to Logan Lake, okay, well, it's not the only egress to Logan Lake. So if it is the only egress, then, we can start looking at it from an emergency management point of view. Do we need to evacuate people? Do we need to support them to shelter in place? Are there medical needs that aren't going to be able to, our responders going to be able to get into community? Do we have blockage? So we can engage to deal with the issues that truck fire is going to cause, but putting it out may be outside of our mandate.
And I can add to that from, or at least from the way I understand it, from Modi's point of view. I mean, their mandate is to keep the highway safe and keep the highway moving. So it really depends on the scenario. So if it's a truck in the middle of the highway blocking traffic, they're gonna have that as a priority to at least keep traffic flowing, whatever that looks like. But a scenario where, yeah, trucks pulled over at a brake check, started fire, or they pulled over as they were smoking, that's one that Modi's not gonna see much risk on. Maybe they'll send a flagging crew out there to, secure it in the sense of, so people don't drive into that risk, but it very well will burn for multiple days. I can share another example. I was, this is years ago now, probably 15 years ago, I was on between Blue River and Clearwater coming back, and there was an RV that was on fire, pulled over on the side of the road. And it was actually, well, it wasn't even pulled over on the side of the road, it was in the lane. It was impeding traffic, and traffic was stopped for about 3 hours until it burnt down enough that the highway crews let us pass by, and we drove by looking at it on fire, but it had settled down and the propane tanks had exploded by then. And I'm not sure how long it sat there for, but that was the scenario.
Just a little bit more information on the fire. It was actually close to Nicola down. They did send out a flagging crew, and they also sent out a wrecker. And it was actually a load of sugar, and it burns really hot. It burnt up one trailer, and then it got into the second trailer. And they finally had to send a tanker out to put the fire out so they could haul the wreckage away. And they did that about 24 hours after the fire. They still had to go out and put water on it so they could remove it. And I couldn't understand why they wouldn't do that to start with. It's just a fairly frustrating item. But I'm trusting that Mr. Hildebrand will deal with that through Wildfire BC. And Wildfire BC did come out, and if they hadn't come out, that whole hillside above Nicola Lake would have burnt, because it was in the middle of the summer.
Certainly,
And
as Mike Knopf said.
They
that-
did respond to that and put the bushfire out, but that was
And
it.
they will always do that as we explained, if there's other risk for sure, but I'm not sure we have any control over a vehicle burning on a highway that's not impeding traffic or causing a safety. That's our problem. Who's gonna do it? We don't have a fire truck. We don't have equipment. We don't have personnel.
No, I didn't expect the team to do it.
No,
The other
just-
interesting fire I saw was a vehicle carrier, and it was at the brake check coming into Kamloops. And it had about, it was fully loaded with brand new vehicles, and nobody went and put the fire out. So not only the semi didn't burn out, but the whole load of new cars, it had to be $300,000 or $400,000 worth of vehicles sitting on that trailer, and nobody went to put it out. I don't know how insurance looks at that sort of thing, but just another comment on.
Thank you, Chair Laird. Just a quick one, and it is very specific to Area P. My apologies to the rest of the EA directors, but it is with respect the Shuswap East Road and the evacuation route. And my question simply, have you had any conversations or success with those conversations vis-a-vis River Shore Fire Department specifically involved in emergency management along that corridor?
No, I have not. Part of the evacuation planning is to do outreach to, some of the community groups and key stakeholders in all of the areas that we're looking at. So that should be on the radar when we're looking at the evacuation plans. But as of this point, no. And it becomes, it's interesting, what sort of evacuation planning has that whole community gone under?
So that, yeah, that's
when
the
Now
supplemental.
you're talking effectively a strata and their own
Yes.
fire department, arm's length away from the TNRD in many cases, but certainly the most significant cluster of properties in the area, it's got to be part of the planning.
Right. So thank you. And supplemental to that is recognizing that, and also recognizing, I think it's going to take more than just myself, having that conversation with them, whether, because we're also looking at that entire corridor and then implications, for example, with the Pritchard Bridge you know, if that was our backup plan, get out of Dodge, as it were. I think if there is an opportunity, I don't know if this is possible, to have you and I join together and have a conversation with Rivershore again, to see if there is something that we can do down the road to engage them.
Oh, for sure.
Great.
100%. I mean, if nothing else, the community association can help, you know, propagate our alert and order information and communicate with, the residents. That goes a long ways. And, you know, to have that community association or someone who can bring some of the issues that, you know, come forward just for our awareness. I mean, we can't solve problems we don't know about. And it's often, you know, yourself or, you know, the community association who really makes those things visible. So happy to have those conversations for sure.
Fantastic. And then we would incorporate the Pritchard Bridge and the dynamics that occur there as well into the conversation possibly.
I just had one suggestion. I don't know whether the other EA directors would want to support it. Could we not fund those stickers out of our discretionary funds? And that way we don't have to look for budget money for it.
Yeah, that's totally possible.
Each EA director could pay whatever it costs to put that information into their residences.
Yeah, that would be up to the 10 electoral areas. Yeah.
Yeah, we would just decide that on our own. We don't need a motion or anything like that.
No.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other questions for our leader of our new emergency planning?
Just,
Yes,
just following up with this, all the stories about the fires on the road and nobody's responding to it. If we're gonna have Modi come here, it seems to me that we should be asking Modi, how should we handle this? And would ICBC, for instance, cover the cost of a fire department responding to put out a fire? Or is the protocol that we notify BC Wildfire Service just to make sure that somebody, you know, if a fire started up the hill, somebody'd say, well, how come you, TNRD, didn't have a protocol in place with Modi or didn't have a procedure in place? So why don't we just ask Modi, it's your road, there's a fire, you would know about it. Here's the resources we could bring to the table. Here's the resources the BC Wildfire Service could bring to the table. Maybe ICBC is part of the equation in paying for our people, and that, I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but I think we should be asking Modi at that meeting about that.
the other interesting thing about that track fire, I phoned every jurisdiction. I got into a fairly heated conversation with 911 when they said nobody had any jurisdiction to go and put that fire out. I couldn't believe that myself. Even 911 said this is not our responsibility. Modi's not trained for putting fires out on the road. The mayor wouldn't send the fire truck out. So there was absolutely no accepting the responsibility of a fire starting and burning like the hillside down. And that was the frustrating part for me. You don't need to respond. I was just sort of venting.
I've got a lot of history with the road rescue file. So that is administered by Emergency Management and Climate Readiness. When I started with that organization so many years ago, it actually shocked me to know that there is no mandated road rescue service. Rescues that happen on the highway happen with fire departments from other jurisdictions working on behalf of the province because they want to, not because they have to or they're required to. So the whole road rescue response is really an ask from the province to municipalities that have fire departments and the capability to do the service. There is no mandated requirement. So yeah, the response on the highways is real interesting when you get into it.
Thank you for your presentation. Brought us up to speed where we're at. It's great to know the emergency plans moving forward. Okay, next is discretionary fund policy updates. Jamie, I think is gonna lead us through this one.
Pardon me? Perfect. All right, so thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this discussion and report is a sort of a precursor to staff drafting a policy and following our process. All of our draft policies go to the policy committee for discussion. So the staff would draft a policy, goes to policy committee for discussion, debate, any updates, changes coming out of that committee meeting would then ultimately then go to the board for adoption of the policy. So we're not there yet. What we wanted to do is bring this discussion to the EA directors about the discretionary fund prior to us drafting a policy for the policy committee. So I'm not going to talk much today. I'm just going to kind of be leading this discussion and bring up a number of questions and give you some insight into what we're planning to include in that policy. And then we want to just get some feedback and input and really just, I guess to be honest, really hear the input from this committee of what types of things you see needed in this new policy update. So I'll just give a little bit of background here, most of which was included in the report. So the discretionary fund policy as we have it now was last updated in May 2018. Everything in the policy is fine, but really the issue is that it's vague or silent on a number of issues or questions around the use of the funds. So staff need better direction on how to administer this program. To be more frank, the issue is that staff are often being left to sort of interpret the intent of the policy and the intent of the funding program. And that is a challenge and really shouldn't be the role of staff, should be the role of the board to provide a clear direction. And then we just administer the policy as directed by the board around the use of these funds. Come on.
Just, I forgot to ask if we should take a quick break or does everybody want to keep going? We're good? Okay.
Oops, there we go. Okay, the other thing I wanted to add is that updating to this policy will align with the recommendations of the forensic audit. So obviously May 2018 was prior to the forensic audit. So some specific recommendations of the audit that updating this policy would align to is strengthening board oversight of financial controls, update policies and bylaws, and increase accountability in finance department. So what I thought I'd start with is let you know sort of our plan. In the report, I called them recommendations, but I didn't want to make it confusing that we were looking for this committee to vote on that. But really, it's what we're planning to include, and happy to listen to feedback and input from this committee. And then following kind of this sort of planned updates, I have a number of questions that are in the report that I think this committee should tackle and debate as we go through those questions. So first, the planned updates are to rename the program. So it's actually got two names right now. We've always internally and at the board level referred to it as discretionary funds. However, the actual application form that gets filled out to use the discretionary funds is called the, oh no, forgive me, Local Community Fund Grant and Aid. So our suggestion is we rename this program and refer to it both externally through the application process and internally here as Electoral Area Grant and Aid. Now the reason for that is kind of to simplify it into two programs. We have the Regional Grant and Aid program, which we've gone through recent policy updates on how that program is administered. So the intent there is that it's funding for regional programs that are benefiting the regional district as a whole. So for example, there was funding used for supporting things like Western Canada Theatre and these kind of broader economic development and events that take place. Whereas the intent of discretionary funds and why we'd call it the Electoral Area Grant and Aid is that these are for events, programs, and projects that directly benefit an electoral area specifically, not really making the case for regional benefit. And the way the regional application is actually scored is that it has to basically show there's a regional benefit for it to be eligible for a regional grant. And this is the opposite of that. The idea is that electoral area grant and aid specifically benefits the electoral area. I also think this would help ensure that both from the board perspective, the public perspective, and staff perspective, that we operate it truly as it's intended. It's a grant and aid program. I think that it could be misleading, this concept of discretionary funds. Even though we don't administer it this way, the perception could be that this is just money that EA directors have in their back pocket and can hand out however they want. And we don't want that to be the public perception. We want to make sure that, again, we're following this as per a policy. So when community groups come to you and request it, you can say, yes, we have a grant and aid program this would fit in. It's electoral area specific grant and aid, instead of the idea being it's discretionary fund. You could, the public coming to you saying you can do what you want with it, it's your discretionary fund, is really not the image that we want to put out there. Speaking of the regional grant and aid, what we're planning on including in the policy is clarity that if an event or project is funded through a regional grant and aid application, then it's not eligible for an electoral area grant and aid, or vice versa. We think this shouldn't be really an issue, because if it's eligible for a regional grant and aid being regionally benefited, then why would you want to use, electoral area specific funding to support that, and vice versa. Electoral area specific programs probably wouldn't fit in the criteria of a regional grant and aid program anyway, but we think that clarity should be in the policy. Now this is kind of a separate piece. We have the grant and aid application for societies and associations to apply for through that application process. Now, separate from that, and using Director Laird's example, or Chair Laird's example he just brought up around using it for an internal purpose, like, for example, fridge magnets, we still need that. We support that and think that's a good idea, and need to clarify that in the policy. So the idea is there's this electoral area grant and aid program that external agencies, organizations can apply for and award money. But if there's an internal program that doesn't have a service or funding, like we want to buy fridge magnets for the residents, then that's a separate mechanism, and we allow for that and have a process in the policy for that. And fourth, around reporting, we definitely need some clarity on this. Our plan is to include that reporting is required from all recipients, so external recipients of the grant and aid. For clarity, the idea, well, we already have a form. It's a simple, essentially one-page report form that would be required to report back on how the funding is used. And in the policy, we clarify if you have not submitted your report, you're not eligible for any further funding that organization until they comply with it. The idea is not to blackball an organization. Okay, you missed the funding deadline, you're not eligible for 5 years. That's not the intent. The intent is you haven't yet submitted your report. Until you submit your report, then we can't review any other applications for that organization. So I'll stop there and maybe put this back to the chair to lead discussion on those points. And then following this, we'll go into those more open-ended questions that I know there'll be a lot of discussion around.
Okay. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jamie. I had, when I read your presentation, I was wondering about our difficulties being EAs, and the process is that we have to give the qualifying people to receive these funds are typically societies or not-for-profits. And if you don't have one of those, then you're kind of hamstrung in where you can put the discretionary funds. So I think if there is a project that an EA director thinks is worthwhile, but isn't specifically being given to one of those agencies, maybe we expand our process. So the director has to complete the form so that there's this notion of accountability. Why are you spending the money? Where are you spending the money? fulfillment, but that the director could initiate, maybe it's a street light, maybe it's a fridge magnet, whatever it is, but allow for that. Because I think, you know, in my area, Cherry Creek, there is no society, but there's lots of requests to do things. And it would only be doable if we allow the discretionary fund. So that's one point. The second point, I saw the stacking thing and I thought about it. Do municipalities, can they stack? Can they give a municipal grant at the same time as a TNRD grant for the same agency?
Sorry, could you clarify that question? Do you mean?
Well, so we have this TNRD regional program, and we just said, can't stack, can't combine. And I'm thinking, why don't we want to combine it? You've explained why you don't want to combine it, but then when you use the thought about Western Canada Theatre Company, we got Western Canada Theatre Company coming to us as a region, and then maybe a municipality deals with that. And so I'm just wondering, your point number two, what are we really achieving if there's a worthwhile project that qualifies for region and also could be topped off by discretionary? Is there something wrong with that?
Yeah, a fair comment, and I think it could be debated. I think one aspect would be this idea of, you know, double dipping, so unfair sort of beneficial treatment for one organization or program. But I also understand the other idea where if it's really worthwhile and you're trying to maximize, the board wants to sort of maximize the amount of funding that you'd want to allow for that. I think CEO Hildebrand had something to add.
I can give you a little example of what we do. Herb and I, we work together on discretionary fund. We get requests from the museum. They are funded already by the area and TNRD taxation. They're funded by the city, but those are for operational funds for the regional or for the local museum. What they come and ask for is, for instance, during the flood, they lost their computers and they came and asked for a discretionary fund grant for replacing computers. And like it's extraordinary things that happen in societies. The local community arts council is also funded for operational costs, but every now and then they have a project that they feel like we could support them, and we also do that. But there's a difference between the grant that goes for the operating of the whatever services we're getting, but there's a need to have that opportunity to support them. We supported the Community Arts Council on a special program they had running for students. So, and that's the sort of thing that you could look at it as being double dipping, but the original budget is for operating. So that's one thing we have to address.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, and that's something we discussed as staff leading going into this. And so the reason I didn't put it in that update or the recommended updates is that we intend to still allow for that, because there's a lot of scenarios where there may be an existing service that funds an ongoing grant and aid for operation. Nicola Valley Archives is a good example, or under community halls, we can use the Savanaw Community Association or the Blue River Community Association. We fund their operational dollars towards their hall operation. But we don't feel that needs to basically make them ineligible for specific grant and aids for programs. So we intend to still allow for that. The idea is, though, that the regional grant and aid program, very specifically the regional grant and aid program versus the EA grant and aid, that those can't be combined. And I also I wanted to address Director Grandier's first question around how do we provide funding where there's not an association. So the intent is that in most cases, item number 3 there is trying to capture that. So I'll use some specific example. Let's say there's an initiative that a community wants. There's a concern about a water quality in a lake and community wants a study commission to find out what's going on. Well, we don't have any service that exists that can fund that. However, if it's something that we could, and as I'm choosing my words carefully here, as long as we could administer that internally with TNRD staff, then we could essentially hire a consultant using this discretionary fund money to pay the bill. So that's an example of how you can support the community without actually giving a cash amount to an associate, or if there's no association. So if I could say that a different way, if TNRD is paying the invoice for something, that's how to address the issue of providing support to a program where an association doesn't exist. Now, the caution is there, we still need the staff capacity to be able to support it. So it depends on how much staff time is involved in administering whatever that ask is. But that's a role also that Joe and Sherry and the community services coordinators can support. So we do have some staff capacity there. So we'd have to deal with that on a project by project basis. But I think that would address most of those scenarios that Director Grenier brought up.
Kimberly, did you just want to just talk to us? We're fine with that. Thank you.
I think that back to Dr. Grenier, the stacking part of things, it's more specifically around a specific project from a specific group, providing regional funds and then also providing the electoral area funds. So if trying to use an example,
You've got an
absolutely,
example?
Tricia, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got
Okay.
a couple of examples that might work. So if we look at the grant and aid and the AA, so Spence's Bridge, the Desert Days reached out this last week, and we thought that they were looking for a grant and aid for $2,500 out of the so-called discretionary funds. When I had a talk with the fellow, he was actually looking for the regional grant. So when he and I talked about it, because it would both be for Desert Days, which is the same event, what we have kind of looked at doing is he's going to apply for the regional grant and aid. And assuming that that works well for them, that'll be what he gets, because that will actually be more than I can afford out of the so-called discretionary funds. If he's not successful with that regional grant and aid, what I have done is I've earmarked a lower amount that I've set aside, that if he's not successful, then we will use that with the EA grant and aid. Because my understanding of the EA grant is it's meant to be smaller funds just to kind of fill little gaps and to help out a little bit here and there where they might not be able to get funding. Another example might be, let's go back to Spence's Bridge again. So Clem's Hall last year, they were trying to do their floor. So I gave some electoral grant and aid, a small amount, to help them with the floor so that, you know, we're helping, but we can't afford to fund $20,000, $30,000. Then what happened is Clem's Hall, their air conditioning and their heating unit went belly up. So actually, I gave them another small amount to help with that. So that particular organization got 2 small grant and aids, but for separate entities. And so I think that might be what we're kind of going apples and oranges with.
Yeah, and that's a very good example, and that's the intent is to continue to allow for that. To allow for, if it's a different project or event, then it's treated as a different application. Because we recognize in some EAs, I mean, I'll use Area B as an example, there's only 2 associations that really would be eligible, but there's going to be multiple events. So very well, and I think probably almost every year, those organizations may receive grant and aid for different projects or events. And we're still suggesting that that's okay. It's just the idea of stacking for the same event or project. That would be the issue that we'd want to avoid.
Did you have some more comments?
Sorry, just one more thing on the stacking, and it is something to be the devil's advocate in the room that I have seen when regional grant and aid funding is not enough because we did have to claw back due to an enormous amount of subscription, that some of the regional directors were able to like top up. So something to think about when we move forward in the policy, that if we say no stacking, that's not possible to do after, if we put it in that we don't want that. I don't necessarily know if it's the right way to go, but something to think about.
Two things. So I feel that we don't need to be restrictive on the stacking, and that the director in the area should be able to make that decision with the grant and aid. That's my opinion on that. And then the second one is, again, Ebola doesn't have a community association or a nonprofit, so that town doesn't have anyone that would specifically be able to apply if we put that restriction in. And what we did this year is did flow through financing through the Blue River Community Association, but that is putting work and tracking on a volunteer group for a different town. And so that restriction as well might not work for some of these very small communities that truly just don't have the nonprofits.
And just for clarity, that restriction's already in place in the current policy, so we're not proposing to change it. And the rationale being that we need someone to be accountable for the funding and the reporting, and how do we do that if there's no association? Unless, like I talked to Director Granier's comment, unless there's a mechanism that we can fund it in-house through us directly paying the invoice, but again, that would be case by case basis, depending on what it is.
Director Armswell.
I know who you mean. Thank you, Chair.
It's
shoot, now I've
okay.
lost my
I think we
train of
got
thought.
it sorted out. You got your light on. You're good to go.
Shoot. Oh, two points. One, just sharing my personal 180 from when I first started this, that yes, I was like, we got this discretionary fund, I need to get it out there, get the money out there and find people to use this. But I in talking with Sherry there, I have to remind myself that, just simmer down. That money doesn't disappear. It's actually, we taxed it from the residents to give away. And if if we can't give it away, it goes back to the next year's budget and, oh, wait, no. Oh,
That question's coming up. We'll talk about that coming up.
okay.
But for clarity, presently, it would be refunded. It goes back to the taxpayer in the sense that any carry forward reduces taxation the following year, but we'll talk about that in coming slides.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And the other one, reporting required. Yeah, I really support that. Like, maybe even, I don't know if there's a way to even ask for more, report back from the grant recipients. I know for Area A, there was, sometimes I'm like, hey, did that event happen? Like, can I see some photos? Can I, so that there's accountability again to taxpayers, that we're not just willy-nilly handing out money and yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So from my end, I really feel the reporting super necessary. I do, but I fulfilled 109 applications this year. Okay, so not a little amount. These are not easy for me to do. They are easy to process, absolutely, but there is back and forth with every group and sometimes multiple times. So asking for the letter. So I have drawn up a new kind of tentative application form, and the application form is asking for the new application form has the information that I asked for in the letter. Because even though I asked for that information in my little blurb, and you guys have all seen my little blurb, they come back and answer maybe one, maybe two of those questions, which is okay, but I really want to know what you're doing for the community, because in a transparency, like trying to be transparent, I need to be accountable to the residents, saying this is why we spend it and this is what they do for it. At 109 applications, and those are the ones that went through, there was the odd ECDev application in there, but how am I supposed to report on all of those?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Kim, I don't, sorry, I wasn't like, saying that, like your workload was not in my intention to add to that. And on that note, thank you very much for, your work. I know in addition to this, you got other grants that you've, preemptively got us the TNRD on. So thank you, for your work. So appreciate it.
And honestly, it's not to complain. So it's just more of, I would love for feedback on how you want me to do that. So maybe it's a dollar amount or something like that, a minimum dollar amount, because sometimes we give out, and I'm not even kidding, $75. So now I'm going back to a group following up on $75. And how much is that worth, like financial time, where really I think you want me to be applying for the grants that bring the money into the TNRD, not necessarily as, like, I know it's important to go out, but I have reporting on those grants. I have, following up with budgets and making sure everybody's on track, and there's interim reporting. Some of them have monthly reporting. So going back and forth makes, I think that in the discussion, let's talk about a dollar, maybe putting a dollar. Oh, okay. Sorry, Jamie.
I have Director Morrison and then Director Smith.
Thank you, Chair Laird. My lifetime in the tourism industry dealing with grants kind of is hitting me in the front of my forehead as we go through this conversation. Just a couple of things that I had basically highlighted. One of them was the stacking question. And I think we need to just leave some flexibility in there, because there are opportunities, as we all know, that come up at various levels, and how can we make that work as best as possible. There was that one. Number 3 spoke with allocating funds for internal use. And I think that is worth looking at, the concept of being able to come to the table on a feasibility project as an example in a small way, I think is a good thing. Questions that were posed, taxation per EA, I think that we, in an overall or more broader sense, the types of questions, requests, and need at various EA levels will also vary with population size. So, I may be as Area P in a little different situation than others. So I think that tiered level needs to be retained and part of the discussion as we go through what is the best use of the funds. I'll skip this one. Unused funding carryover.
If I may, the intent is to go through these questions individually, so I was just gonna move on to that in the next slide.
Okay.
And then my suggestion is the committee discuss, debate each question
Okay,
as we
sure.
go
I
through.
thought you wanted our rundown.
No, it was just on these sort of planned updates, and I think the questions.
I hit pause.
Yeah. That's okay with you, Chair. Maybe I'll skip ahead because everyone wants to dive into these topics.
Director Smith just has a question, then we'll move forward.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think Director Sal was talking about reporting from the recipient back to the TNRD, not from you to us. Not to increase your load to report back to us on how the project is going, but how the applicant would be reporting the progress back to you.
And on that reporting piece, that's why the point 4 there, the intent is, as we don't have the capacity to chase everyone around for the report, we just simply make the policy, when they receive a grant, they get the reporting form, they don't submit it and they apply again, we simply say, well, you haven't submitted the report. It's back to, so we're not chasing around the 109 people, it's up to them to provide the report. Shall I move on, Chair? Okay.
Ready to go?
So yes, the questions here are straight from the report in front of you. A couple of them I grouped on one slide because they're kind of related. So I think these ones should be discussed at the same time. So the idea of what should the maximum taxation be? So currently it's $13,500 is budgeted in each EA. So that's combining what used to be just specifically the arts and culture grant and aid with what we call discretionary fund. So for 2024 budget, we've just lumped those into a single line item. So nothing's been increased from past practice. But at the same time as discussing that, I want you to consider, should the discretionary fund remain equal across all EAs, or should individual EA directors recommend a level of taxation in their area? Now, that's kind of a big bomb I'm throwing out there, so I'll just say my two bits. The things to consider are, I guess I'll comment from both angles. One angle could be justification that some EAs are bigger, have more tax base and more associations and organizations looking for funding. But on the other side of the equation, I would say to consider the optics of it. If one EA chooses to tax their residents, let's say $50,000 a year, another EA director recommends taxing $5,000 a year, you get into the optics of this have and have not areas. And that has a broader impact on sort of the optics of the TNRD as a whole. So keep in mind that even though these are all taxation specific to your electoral area, it's the TNRD that's ultimately accountable for that and the image of the TNRD impacted by that. So I'll leave it at that and put that back to the chair for discussion, because those are two big ones that have been coming up.
The one thing that we did, sorry. Yeah. I just was going to remind everybody that our economic development funding went back into either discretionary funding or back to the taxpayers. It was at the discretion of the EA directors. So there's already either more funds in your account this year or not, depending what you did with your money. Jill, and then I'm listening to gave me a list.
Okay, I just want to say that I think it would be better if it stayed the same right across the board, because if you're a smaller EA area, you're going to have to be explaining why you're so cheap compared to the guy who's giving away more money. And I think that is going to happen for sure.
Your turn, Trish.
Sure, now you listen to him. I'm just teasing you. I agree with Jill. I think we should keep it the same all across the board. It's the optics of it. And we need to come across as being the TNRD, not being area I or area P or area ABC. We need to look like we're being equitable. If somebody isn't using it all, then it's either going back, or if we decide that we're carrying forward. But it's that continuity, I think, is important.
Just a question is, can EA directors give their discretionary fund to another EA director if they think it's something that they would like to do? Is that a possibility?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that as long as it fits within this policy. So for example, if it was through an application of external agency that went in, there'd be nothing currently that would stop that from happening. Or if it was a project that it was funded internally with the discretionary funds, that it could be contributed from another area.
Jim, you had a question? No?
Husa.
Oh, Husa. There.
Thank you, Chair. Just sharing opinion about the, just looking at what other orders of government do when they evaluate grants, like looking at oversubscription or undersubscription. I think, each of us now have a bit of a, well, we have 1 year of grant application now under our belts, and we can tell if it's oversubscribed or not. So I think we could have some flexibility in each individual director's input on the recommendation, I think.
The one other question I had, and I can't remember if I got it answered. We have Rodeo Association, Fall Fair, Garlic Festival. Those are three that I can think of that we give funding to yearly. And it's just for their special events, and I think it's about $500 that we each put into it. Is that something that we need to have in the policy for? And we did discuss whether it should be a budget item that should just be directly, like for instance, the Rodeo Association gets $2,000 a year and it goes into a budget, but maybe you could answer that.
Yeah, and so that's currently in the policy and the intent of it, and I think our recommendation from staff is kind of leave it the same. The idea is that the discretionary funding shouldn't be used for ongoing operational things. So just for example, operational dollars for a community hall every year. If that's something the area director wants to fund, then that should be through a service establishment process. However, for clarity, an event like using the Garlic Fest for an event, we would see that as 2023 event, and then maybe the 2024 event, you would decide whether or not that's something that's eligible. And the other reason I bring that example up is we wouldn't establish a service to support an event because you don't know that event's ongoing. So ongoing operational costs, no, the intent is the discretionary is not to fund ongoing operational cost. But an ongoing, or what perceived to be an ongoing event, those would be treated as one-off events.
Thank you. Director Grenier.
Thank you, Chair. Have we topped out, has any director topped out on their 13.5? Is that a good enough number?
All but a few. Everybody else has spent everything for last year. Yeah.
So is there a recommendation on the 13.5? Should it be increased, or, because if you don't use it, it just goes back.
Well, the do not use it, go back. We're going to deal with that question next. I think this is a really more of a political decision. The optics around, how much funding should be essentially being used at, even though we're not going to call it that, at the discretion of the EA director, and that directly impacting taxation, is really a question for this committee, and ultimately the board needs to discuss. So, my gut, and CEO Hildebrand can jump in, is that this level is a reasonable level. Increasing it further, you're getting into the area there's all, depending on what you increase it to, but that's a lot of funding, a lot of taxation that is being perceived to be solely at the control of one individual director.
And if I could jump in, that's kind of what we heard really directly from the auditors, that they were comfortable with when it was at 10.5 or even this 13.5. But anything more, that they were concerned about that the entire board did not have the oversight on how that was potentially being decided. And there was even, and this is just talk amongst the audit team when we were talking, but there's also probably going to be restrictions on there on when this can be used, because if it's 6 months prior to election, there is that perception that it could be used to buy votes. There's all sorts of different implications that we need to make sure we address, because it's truly being managed by one individual in an elected official capacity.
What's changed is that we discussed having a discretionary fund instead of an economic development fund. And did each director, I think we had, our one was $20,000 a year that went into economic development. That was probably for every area director got that amount every year for economic development?
No, the way the economic development budgeting process was happening prior to 2022, and my understanding of how it operated was essentially a discussion between the EA director and the CFO at the time. So it was different. It was always different between the EAs. And that's why, going back to our previous EA committee meeting that we had prior to Christmas, we're recommending moving away from that, because there wasn't any sort of accountability or direction there. So that's the answer. No, it was not even across all EAs. It was based on essentially recommendation of the EA director for the ECDev.
The other thing that's disappearing is the Gold Country funding. I know, I think Herb and I put $30,000 a year into that funding. And now the other EA directors that were paying into that, they're dropping that funding off as well. So I think we can have my concern is if you have an economic development opportunity and you use all your direct discretionary fund, because it might be a one of, support for something in your community that's economic development. Because we don't have a separate budget for that, it all goes under our new discretionary fund. We could use all that on one event for economic development, and then we don't have discretionary funds for the smaller items that we deal with. So just wondering how, if you had any idea how you could make it that it's economic development and discretionary, and
Yeah, I'll just provide a comment on that, actually clarification that we, as part of this process, we did a dive into understanding the service establishment for the discretionary fund and the economic development fund. And what we discovered is that the discretionary fund taxation is collected through the authority of the economic development service. So this funding, call it what you will, EA, grant and aid, economic development, or discretionary fund, it's all being collected under the authority of the service establishment bylaw that's called economic development. So I'm not, I hear what you're saying, Chair Laird. I just wanted to provide that clarification, is that really it's all supposed to be somehow tied to economic development as per the service establishment bylaw.
any other questions? We're probably looking at a recommendation whether 13.5 is adequate. Now, this amount could be addressed. Maybe we'd go with 13.5 this year and see what happens, how it works with the economic development and discretionary, because a lot of us just put the economic development funding back into discretionary. So some of the directors already have a substantial amount in that fund. So
Yeah, and I
maybe
think we're
if
gonna
we set
talk
a,
about that. As far as the amount for this year, that's the number that's locked in the budget as it sits right now, is at 13.5.
Yeah.
So anything more would impact
Yeah.
taxation, and so
Yeah.
your idea of maybe
That-
seeing how it goes makes sense.
my recommendation is that we put it at 13.5, and if we need to look at changing it next year after trying this number, we can look at it and adjust it for 2025 budget if everybody thinks that's agreeable.
Yeah.
Do you
Just
need
maybe
that
a
in the
question
motion?
over the corporate officer or deputy corporate officer. Can we just take this into consideration for developing it, or should we go for a motion for each of these questions?
I think isn't this
What-
standard practice now? So I don't think so if we're leaving it the same, I don't think there's any motion required, would be my understanding. Yeah. So unless the number changed, then we would maybe have to think
Okay,
about it.
so we'll just take it as, well, can we take it as consensus that we remain at 13.5 and move on to the next question?
Don't need a motion for that.
Okay, because it'll formally get, again, we'll build it into an updated policy that'll go to the policy committee and go to the board. Okay, so we got direction on that. Now, the next question, if I may, Chair, do we have consensus on, or further comments on the dollar amount being equal remaining? What I'm hearing is that it should remain equal across all EAs, but we haven't heard from all the directors. What's the feedback
Any
there?
directors disagree that it shouldn't be equal? I think that's a good idea. Because it's Director Hooton.
Just to read this, like my little economic development fund that was left over, I think was $1,896. Would that go on top of the 13.5 as we're gonna, as we are
yes,
today?
for this year, yes, as
Yeah.
economic development funding is a one-time contribution,
Okay.
so it would be adding to what was originally budgeted as a 13.5. Yeah.
Any other comments? Whether
Okay,
we-
so we'll go forward hearing that this committee supports leaving it equal.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's, everybody agrees on that one. Good.
All right, next question. So, yes, so the current practice is that, unused funding, does not compound and add to the next year's budget. It just offsets taxation the following year. So if you use $5,000 only and there's a remaining 8.5 left, that 8.5 gets carried over and only taxed 5,000 to top it up to 13.5. That's our current practice. there's nothing to say we couldn't change the practice or policy and allow that to add up, meaning you tax 13.5 every single year, regardless of the amount of usage. But putting that out there for discussion, that we would, if there's no further direction to change anything, we would have this current practice built into the policy.
Director Oslo?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair
Well, it's
O'Reilly.
really close.
Going along some of Director Granier's thoughts, we want to avoid building up surpluses. So I would be against, I would be in favor of just keeping it as it is. Thank you.
Maybe I should just ask the question, is that the way all the directors are feeling? We leave it as is?
I'd support that.
Yeah, okay,
Okay,
there's your answer.
perfect. Move on to the next question then. Yeah, so this is coming from a lot of angles, but what should be minimum, should there be, and what should it be, a minimum and maximum dollar amount per grant and aid application? So should EA director be, ability to approve the full amount going to a single event or single organization? And at what point do we say, you know what, we don't want to process an application that's only $50. It should be a minimum of $500, for example. Putting that out there for discussion.
Director Thorpe?
Okay, so the minimum, that one's a little tricky because I know, for example, the Rotary Club asks that I sponsor a Citizen of the Year, and it comes in under $100. So maybe no minimum, perhaps a maximum if we're concerned about the optics, particularly in election year. So maybe that's something to consider. I think that a lot of the things we do are small amounts, 500 here, 500 there, so that we can spread it as far as we can and help as many, because it is supposed to be a grant and aid as opposed to funding a project. But those are just my thoughts.
Director Houghton? And then just.
Shouldn't this call be really the director's call? I mean, to decide if you want to give $100 or 500, or like I did at the end of the year, I give 3 community halls, 3,000 apiece. Shouldn't that take all the rules and regulations out? Shouldn't that this particular thing be up to the EA director?
The comment on the minimum, I'll just add in, really has to do with it, as long as it's recognized, and it'll have to be recognized by the board that this is staff time. So staff time to process a $25 application is the same as a $1,000 application. And I think I see CFO Fox's hand up, or that's probably what you wanted to say. Okay, no.
Actually, yeah, that was my point. Yeah, we get staff comments on, if $75 are we, yeah.
Considering the cost of things these days, $75 doesn't go very far. So I guess, maybe through to Kimberly, what would you say that a minimum should be that would work for you?
I honestly struggle with a minimum because I had, and I think it was maybe Director Hayward, just an invoice came in for $75 for a wreath at the for Remembrance Day celebration. I don't want to eliminate ones like those, and then I also don't want to have to provide them $250 or $500 when it is a $75 item.
I'm gonna jump on that one. That's an example where we were paying the invoice though. So the intent of this is a grant and aid, so someone actually submitting an application. So separate from using the discretionary funds for an internal cost, that's something that I don't think we need a minimum for. But actually processing an application, requiring them to submit a report. That was the intent of this. Sorry, we should have chatted before.
Any other discussion around this? Do we want to leave it the same or do you want to make any changes?
Well, we currently don't have any minimum or maximum.
Yeah, that's what I'm
So-
saying. Do we?
Yeah,
I think we just heard that it's an expensive proposition on $75. So we as EA directors have to approve these things. So I think maybe we govern ourselves on the applications. If it's really critical that we give a $75 grant and aid, there must be a story behind it. But otherwise, I think we'll just, it seems to me that we'll use our own discretion to funnel these things through. Is that a reasonable approach? Have you had 10 of these $75 or just? No.
Not 10 of 75. It's usually 200 and, let's call it 250 would be maybe the bottom end for the most part. Usually 500 is definitely in some areas very common. And then, so it, 1,000 or 2,000 could be possibly the amount. So maybe more looking at a maximum might be a thought.
I just have a question about something in particular for my area, but the Blue River Community Association does everything. And so we're submitting, say, 6 different applications. Would it be more effective to submit one for 10,000 and say, these are the projects that are going on this year? And is that easier on the paperwork or better for tracking?
I honestly don't want to come across as complaining about the paperwork because it is what it is. I don't know. That would be up to you on how Blue River wants to sort that out, because you're right. They do have the same events kind of happening every year and a dollar amount attached to them. Where it would be important is in the reporting. So how that money was used, and if there's funds left over, they should be coming back to the TNRD and not staying in say Blue River's Community Association in if they were to apply for a $10,000 overarching grant for this example, then we want more information. We want budget. We want a breakdown of how everything's going to be spent, or you guys want that. If, for me to ask for that, maybe, I think asking for financials is a good situation as well. Providing them $10,000, maybe it should be a service.
If it's all right with the board, I think we'll let that particular number 4 stand as it is. And then just ask the directors that they, we know the amount of staff time it takes to do $75, but again, $75 or $500, if it's an important event for $75, I think Kimberly's saying she doesn't have a problem with that. Okay, so it'll stay the way.
so
it
yeah,
is.
we'll take it as not including any maximum or minimum in the policy. Okay, and this one, I think this is fairly clear, but I wanted to put it out there because it just came up as a question from staff when we were kind of debating it and discussing it. So can the same organization receive funding for different projects or event in the same year? And or should there be limitations? And recognizing we've already talked about it, some EAs, there's only one association. So I guess before I turn it back to the committee, I'm going to suggest that we think this is okay the way it's going currently, but I wanted to put the question out there just to confirm that, for example, the Blue River Community Association could receive a grant for an event that's happening, a spring dinner and also a fall festival. Those are separate events, but it's the same organization that's applying for it. Confirming that we're still good with continuing that, or should there be any sort of limitations around it?
Myself, I don't have a problem with what's there now. I don't know what the other board directors feel. Change required. Okay.
Yep. Okay, we'll move on then. All right, these ones I lumped together as well. I recognize this is kind of a loaded question, but wanting some, and we're still working through creating this, so we don't have a recommendation yet, but it will be in a policy as a more kind of thorough process for how do we review the applications and what's that process? So do staff make a recommendation to the EA director based on the policy saying, I received this application, I recommend we fully fund it to this amount, or I recommend we fund it to 50% based on these things. Should staff have that involvement, or should it be the sole discretion to the electoral area director to have responsibility for how these funds are allocated and accountability? Should that fall directly on the area director and not have staff involved in that review process? Review process, not the actual payment of it. The staff would still be involved with that. And related to that process is at what point does the board get involved? And again, we're still going to be thinking about that from a staff level in developing this policy, but wanting the input here. Where's the trigger that we have to have the board approve it? Even though, to clarify, the board is approving the budget of the 13,005, but when the board approves that, that's essentially approving that money, not knowing where it's going to be spent. So there's the accountability question there. Yes, it's approved that amount of money, but if someone wants to give all that money to one organization, we need to reflect in the policy, does the area director have that discretion, or is there a trigger that the board needs to approve who it's being awarded to?
Just ask one question. Have you ever had any of the directors, like what is the most money any director's given to one society since you've been doing it, Kimberly?
$6,000 to one society in 2 payments.
What was it for?
Am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was for Director Morris had, I can't remember if it's Heffley Lake or Heffley Creek, but it was the bark beetle initiative
Okay.
in that area. Yeah,
So
so
it's very unusual where you get, that would be very unusual to get high amounts coming from the EA directors now.
well, this was just this year.
Yeah, so are you uncomfortable with the way that was processed?
I think if I could jump in for Kim,
Yeah.
you know, it's going to be the comfort level of ultimately, I mean, we're wanting input from this EA committee, but also it's going to be the policy committee that we're going to ask the same question of what the account, where should the accountability and what should the trigger be? And then the board ultimately needs to adopt that. So thinking for really, is kind of a political decision and responsibility and accountability.
And Director Houghton and then Director.
My thoughts on this, I mean, we all go in front of the voting public every 4 years. They elect us to do a job. And it seems like we shouldn't have to go for 13.5, go for a referendum to the board for everything we need to spend. I mean, if 4 years from now, the electorate's not happy, well, get us out of here then. I mean, we're elected, and I think we have the ability to sort of oversee this 13.5. If it was 130,000, okay, that's different. But 13.5 spread out amongst our whole EA, I mean, we should have the authority to allocate that. And then, you know, if somebody wants to question us, we'll question us.
Director Hayworth?
I just wanted to say that this was a learning year last year. I'm sure I drove Kim crazy. But I tried really hard to work with every person that was making an application rather than just have it sent directly to the TNRD, because I wanted to know what was going on and what they were asking money for, so that I wasn't surprised when I got the email that said these people are wanting $7,000 or something. I think that we're probably all a lot smarter now, the ones that didn't do it before. And as Doug says, I think 13.5 is, if we can handle 13.5, I personally, as a board member, do not want to hear what everybody's stuff is and have to vote on it, because I'm going to be voting on something I know absolutely nothing about, which I think is unfair. But I think at that number, that's a low enough number that we should be able to handle that. If we can't, we shouldn't be here, really.
Director Thorpe?
I think that this is an EA discretion. Actually, Kim and I've had discussions lots of times when it comes to money and how much or how we should do it. I think that we all can take the responsibility. I know I had one group ask me for about half of my discretionary funding. for one item, and I kind of went, nope, this has got to be divided among everybody. So I think we all have the ability to try and do the best that we can. A dollar amount approved by the board. Now, there's something in our bylaws or policy that says that in an election year, so many months before the election, that there is a very low dollar amount that we are allowed to do without it having to come before the board. So could we not just leave that as it is?
Yeah, that's currently in the discretionary fund policy, so we can, and the intent is to leave that language in there.
Scott, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with what I'm hearing. I think that makes good sense. And I like the fact that if all 10 electoral areas can be involved in the application, as Jill was saying, I think that makes the most sense because then there's complete transparency. And if from an auditor standpoint, if there could be something in the policy that says the electoral areas take full accountability of these, because they're at the end of the day, they're signing off on them. I mean, that's good enough for me. I think that's makes sense. And that's what you're elected to do.
Right, Kimberly?
I think you all know the way this works. It either comes in directly to me or an application comes in directly into you folks. If it comes into me first, usually what I do is vet the application and look for like the letter and make sure the group is in good standing, just because there's no point going to you and then coming back. It just takes too much time. As for the decision making, it's always been up to you. And I think that every single one of you have had an application that's at least half or more of your annual budget. So ending up how you spend it, that's, I've always said you can approve or decline the amount, and we just kind of roll that way. So it's just more of discussion.
Question through to Scott. Do you look at every application that comes in for discretionary funds and say yes or no?
I sign off on everyone. So it's
So if
visible.
there was an issue, you would
But I
pick it
also
up?
trust staff that it's been vetted and I trust the electoral area, but ultimately I need to sign it.
Yeah. Dr. Sal?
Thank you. Actually, question and a point. The question, I thought there is already a maximum. I've been telling people, $3,000 per application. Was that? Oh. Oops.
You can totally have your own, no maximum.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see. Oh, okay. And the second, yeah, well, I mean, I'm just piling on to the reason why we shouldn't need the board approval. Another is just a time frame in getting the grant paid out. Just this morning, there was somebody applying, concerned, should they apply for a smaller amount to get the process, faster, but doesn't make make any difference. But yeah, time is also a factor if we get the board involved. So thank you.
So are there any changes? We don't need to worry about that number 7. That should stay the way the policy is now. Is there any discussion around that? Go ahead, Lee.
Sorry, just a quick question. I'm wondering from a transparency perspective, if we use the example that we just alluded to vis-a-vis my area, where there put something in place that, for example, gives the rationale behind that, because the application form itself doesn't really give the EA that opportunity, director. So there's where that step may have resolved any confusion. So maybe that's just an administrative suggestion.
I totally agree with that. We need more information because, like I mentioned before, even when we ask for the letter, we get kind of half of the information. So a more complete application form, maybe looking for some financials, a budget, and then reporting on those bigger amounts. And, your discussion with the group as well, maybe documenting that, sending it on. And I think then we are in a transparent situation.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that under question 6, really it's the EA directors who are ultimately approving or declining the application for the grant and aid, and that the dollar amounts, that there is no threshold that it needs to go to the board for approval. That means it's being approved through the budget process, the 13.5.
Sounds good. I think the board agrees to that.
Okay, well, we will take that info back, and like I said, it's the March is the next policy committee meeting, other than the one tomorrow, which will bring a draft policy to, and then it'll ultimately go to the board from there.
Good. Anything else on the agenda? Scott?
Thank you. Just two quick things. One, we did plan on having a bit of a discussion after this, but we ran out of time. Obviously, there was too many questions and inputs, so we're gonna have to maybe think about that in the future, which is totally possible. And then I'm also gonna be mentioning this in the board meeting this afternoon, but since Kim's here, Kim is actually moving on to another role. And I think some of you may already know that already, but I just want to thank her for her contributions.
We don't support that move.
Okay, fair enough, but you're gonna have to talk to Kim about that because unfortunately.
You're gonna love what she's doing in
It's
her.
not that we don't want you to, improve your employment here, but we don't want you to go.
I know, but do you know where I'm going? Oh, so I'm the lead Fire Smart coordinator for the TNRD. So you're just gonna have me in a new role and I'll just still be dealing with just fire stuff. it's a
So,
good thing.
yeah, so we wanted to just mention that publicly. I'll mention that this afternoon as I'm talking a little bit about those things, but we wanted to just thank him for that. We do have a handful of candidates. I know, I think interviews are on Monday, and we're working through that, but we really need see the cooperation and the patience of this team because we don't have crossover and backfill plans. Like we don't have somebody that can just jump in and take on that role. So things may get delayed in the next month until we get somebody on board, and then there's going to be a transition. Kim's committed to help transition the new person as well. And I know Jason and Jamie have also committed to that, but just keep that in mind. But if something came in on Monday, it may not get processed right away. So please just use your discretion on that one and we'll do our best to turn it around.
No, thanks very much, Kimberly. You've been a breath of fresh air getting our discretionary fund sorted out, and you've done an excellent job. Does that mean we have a new person for the community improvement fund as well? That's your job, is it? So,
It's all of the grant
Correct.
role that will go
Okay.
to a new person.
great.
But I'm still here, so my brain will still have all
Yeah.
the information in it.
Well, we did see Agnes come back, so. Okay, with that, I have the meeting is, how do we need a motion to close this meeting or we just close? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.